What's up guys, James here, how are you doing? So this video is going to be a response to some of the things said in the debate, is feminism sexist? I've got some agreements and disagreements with both sides, although I am quite heavily in favour of Tom Martin's position, namely that this particular group of feminists are quite sexist. This may well be my longest video to date. Might end up being about 3 hours or so, so if it is exceedingly long, I'll chop it up into lots of little parts. But anyway, let's begin.
Professional feminists' next favourite sex trick is inflating rape statistics. Professional victim feminists are the queens of false allegation. Professional victim feminists will cook the statistics in any way possible to make men look more rapey than we actually are. Firstly, professional victim feminist government ministers will claim that only 2 or 3% of rape claims are false, when research and experience shows more like 50 to 90% of rape claims are false. The government, the police, the elite feminists know this, but they're keeping it secret. Men are being portrayed somewhere between 17 and 45 times more rapey than we actually are.
I'm going to be starting off with a disagreement with Tom. I bet people weren't expecting that. Now, I think Tom is cherry-picking just as much as the opposition in this case. The two studies I think he's looked at must have been the McLean 1979 study, which was 16 out of 34 false claims, which is 47%, and there's also the Stewart 1981, which had 16 out of 18, which is just under 90%. Those, however, are the only two studies I'm aware of which show such alarmingly high figures. They also had extremely small sample sizes compared with many of the others. I did my own meta-analysis a while ago. It was quite crude, but it showed roughly 12 to 13% false claims. Now, they are provably false claims, so the real figure is going to be higher than that. But I think it's dishonest to immediately to say that it's between 50 and 90% without some quite solid evidence.
Another way professional feminists will generate rape hysteria is by pretending that women are sex trafficked into prostitution from overseas, tricked or forced into sex slavery. The last government claimed there were 80,000 trafficked women, but it turned out there were 80,000 foreign prostitutes in the country, and the government decided to pretend they'd all been forced into it. The government released posters saying men who went with foreign prostitutes would be rapists, as the women had been forced into it. What the government did not tell you is that a 2009 nationwide police operation raided 800 or more premises couldn't find anyone who'd been forced into it. It turns out they hadn't been press ganged, but were volunteering to be sex slaves. But the professional victim feminists would rather present the poor old punter or job as some abominable rapist, rather than just an icky loser having sex with an even ickier loser.
I was completely with you up until the icky losers comment which you made. Also, the voluntary sex slave thing, I think, was just simply a slip of the tongue. A few people bring that up a bit later in the debate. The government basically lying about sex trafficking and then calling loads of men rapists because of their lies is one of the most disgusting things you can possibly do. Accusing someone of rape is one of the most vile things you can ever do to a person. As for the icky loser comment, the reason I disagree is that there's lots of reasons why someone may end up choosing to see a sex worker or become a sex worker themselves. The same sort of lack of opportunities and those kind of things which may lead some people to becoming sex workers may also be the same reason many men actually see sex workers. Some of them just aren't any good for women, which may or may not be their own fault, but we need to look at what's actually the causes of that. and actually help those guys, as opposed to just shaming them for wanting to express their sexuality.
Well, that was interesting. Do I think women are oppressed by society? Yes, I do. Do I blame men for this? No, I don't. I, like the majority of feminists, blame the patriarchy. Now, it's quite interesting actually, because Tom, what you've done is you've essentially given us a lecture on what you believe feminism is, and I think it actually runs contrary to what I've ever been told feminism is, what I believe feminism to be, and I'm one of those professional feminists you seem to take in such a strong dislike to. Unfortunately, there aren't as many of us as you like to make out, if only there were more.
Sorry for the change of scenery here. So she's saying, I don't blame men, I blame the patriarchy. So what she's basically saying here is, I'm not saying you are a violent rapist, I'm saying that society has turned you into a violent rapist. And those two things are basically indistinguishable. It may seem hyperbolic from what you've seen so far, but she does say some pretty sexist things later on, which we'll get to. She also says, oh, well, that's not what professional feminism's about. Now, I cut out quite a lot of what Tom said. I'm only really keeping in the bits which I disagree with, for the most part, and bits I can comment on. But Tom does go over a long list of things which professional feminists have said, statistics which they've gathered, including her and the people that she works with. So to say, well, that's not what it's about. This is stuff which you have come up with, and stuff which you have publicly said that you agree with. So you are already chatting out to your arse.
And when I say I blame the patriarchy and I don't mean men, I mean that I blame a society that is held back by structures stemming from a time when actually we didn't have this kind of quality of debate, stemming from a time when your position in society was dictated by your money, dictated by your class, and of course it still is. And I really worry actually that those are some of the things you've ignored. You made a few references there to if black people were treated in the way men are. Actually, we live in a society where there are many black people who live in this country because their families came here when some of our ancestors bought and sold them, and to actually compare historically and ignore that historical problem, and compare men who have traditionally always been powerful positions in our society, really ignores a whole load of things. And do I think men face problems? Of course I do. I'd be naive not to. But to just simply talk about that in terms of gender when all the evidence suggests otherwise, and not talk about race, not talk about sexuality, not talk about class, I think not only is quite false, but it really does a disservice to a lot of people. I'm not going to justify the statistical analysis behind the pay gap. I'm sure all the statisticians who work in government offices and work on newspapers and repeat that and say that's a valid statistic, they do that for me.
Estelle accuses Tom of ignoring the historical factors and structures in society which led to the oppression of black people, and talks about how those structures in society have harmed women. What she fails to realise is that those same structures in society which have harmed women have also harmed men in different ways. For example, men being sent to die in war against their will. She also says about how men have traditionally always been the ones in power, but what she fails to realise is that that is a tiny minority of people. Feminists tend to complain that there's not enough women up at the top of society, whereas the MRAs tend to complain about the men who are at the absolute bottom of society and are treated like crap. That seems to be one of the major differences in terms of the types of issue which we approach. She also just says that this is a repeated theme. When it comes to any men's issues, she completely sidetracks it. She's like, that's history, or that's economics. that's not in my area of expertise, so I'm going to ignore that, and I'm going to trust that the people who are doing those things are doing that right, because that's nothing to do with feminism. You'll see quite a lot of that later. Another one of the things that she blames a lot of the oppression of men on class. So, that's not a sexism issue, but that's not a gender issue. That 90% of guys die, and 90% of workplace fatalities are men, or that kind of thing. That's because of class. Just because it's a heavily gendered issue doesn't mean that it's a gendered issue. It's completely nonsensical, and of course, she doesn't take the same approach when it comes to female issues.
We talk about violence against women. Now, violence against women is something that's very important to me. I'm a radical feminist, one of the ones I'm sure Tom will be telling his children to look out for.
Okay, so quick note to my sex-positive feminist subscribers. Yes, MRAs do quite often overgeneralise feminists, but you hold absolutely no moral high ground in that regard. However, when we're criticising feminism, we're generally criticising the academic feminists, the feminist literature, the feminists who actually have political influence. The sex positives will generally agree that they don't have any political influence, and they complain about it quite a lot as it happens. So, when we're criticising feminists, we're criticising the ones which actually have an influence on society, the ones who massively overinflate female issues, demonise men in the process, and then claim an absolute monopoly on equality whilst completely ignoring the male side of the issue.
But I believe that actually violence against women is fighting violence against women is a cornerstone of feminism. But let's talk about some of the things that you said. Let's talk about the fact that you say, oh well, the numbers that equal more men experience violence, etc., etc. Now, I think we'll take more time we've got here this evening to unpick some of the things you've said. Let's actually talk about the type of violence women experience. Every statistic, every report, and these are not the reports, these are reports funded by a variety of organisations, say that the type of violence women experience is very different. It's long-term systematic violence. It's violence that only gets reported to the police after more than 13 incidents. It's violence from a loved one that starts with psychological abuse and leads to physical abuse. And we know that actually 2 women a week are killed by a current or former partner in the UK. That's the type of violence we're talking about.
Okay, so firstly, it's abuse, not abuse. Sorry, but maybe it's just me, but I kind of find it a minor irritation when people in a debate can't even speak properly. That's kind of a bare minimum I expect. Now, you are right in that when it comes to the most severe cases of domestic violence, when people are hospitalised, when people have bones broken and they're murdered, more often it's women. However, when it comes to domestic violence as a whole, the stats are actually fairly even, with men suffering more of certain types of abuse and women suffering more of other types of abuse. In cases where the abuse is one way, not reciprocal, women actually are more often violent than men. So, unless you're claiming that domestic violence funds should only go to the most severe of cases, then your viewpoint is inherently sexist. Now, I've been assaulted by many of my ex-partners for virtually nothing at all. One of my ex-girlfriends grabbed me round the back of the neck and punched me about 30 times in the back of the head, leaving quite a nasty lump because I made a little joke about her religion. Men are often brought up to never hit a woman, even in self-defence. I know guys who've been punched in the face, strangled, they've had women come at them with knives, and they haven't struck back. This is an area where women are extremely privileged. Also, outside of domestic violence and rape, men are the vast majority of nearly every other form of violence. They're more likely to be stabbed, they're more likely to be murdered, they're more likely to be sent away to war, they're more likely to die at work, they are far more likely to commit suicide, all sorts of ways where men are the vast majority of victims of violence. Yet you completely ignore those whilst wanting an absolute monopoly on equality. Now that is sexist.
We're not talking about two people in the heat of the moment coming closer with each other. We're talking about violence as a base. Let's talk about why women are violent. Let's talk about why some of the stats exist around women's use of weapons. Women's apparently completely out of context starting of violence. That's a reaction. That is a long-term reaction to violence. If you look at how people behave when they have been in traumatic situations, yes, sometimes there's not even a struggle, sometimes there is, but we don't understand it. We don't understand that that movement towards the kitchen door has meant for the past 4 years a punch in the face. We don't understand that getting particularly angry about the football result actually means you're going to be lying face down in a pool of your own blood that night. We don't understand what the triggers are, but they exist. So that violence isn't unprovoked, it isn't premeditated. That violence stems from systematic abuse.
So when a woman is a victim of violence, it's because of what the man did. When a man is a victim of violence, that's because he must have done something to provoke it. Bear in mind that this woman is the person they chose to argue that feminism isn't sexist. Let that sink in for a little while.
The idea of money for violence against women's services, well, if only I wouldn't be wearing a shirt from Asda if there was a lot of money sloshing around in the feminist movement.
And that was me thinking you just didn't give a shit about your appearance.
You talk about each rape as being almost a separate accusation against each man, but actually, a rape accusation isn't saying, oh look, another man's done this. The majority of rapists or repeat offenders done offending load to 14 times and often never caught.
When the organisation which you represent exaggerates rape statistics by using flawed data collection methods, the results of that are sexist. You're going to be causing unnecessary fear or unreasonable fear towards men. So yes, that is sexist.
I don't think she's a victim. I don't think she thinks she's a victim. And I don't think women who day in, day out fight for better rights for them, fight for better rights for their sisters, both here and around the world, I don't think they're victims. The only person playing the victim card tonight, Tom, is you. The only person saying that, somehow, oh, the world's conspiring against me, all the women, oh, everything in my life. I don't think there's a conspiracy. I think there's a problem with
I'm okay, thanks.
Good. But the only sense of victimhood here is I'm getting from the side of the debate that is so seemingly obsessed with the fact that women are out to get them. I don't think men are out to get me. I think society's broken and we need to fix it.
Now, I don't think she should have been interrupted like that. It makes the people on Tom's side look bad. Also, I think that he should have just let her dig herself in a little deeper. Now, her calling Tom a victim is what I like to call a you're a towel argument, and if you watch South Park, you'll understand the reference there. Now, Tom has never said that women are out to get him. What he has said is that he thinks that feminism is sexist, specifically the feminism which Estelle is representing. He's referenced faulty data which the people that she represents have pumped out, and how men are exclusively viewed as the aggressors, which Estelle has done during this debate, the woman who's been picked to show how unsexist feminism is. And he's talked about how men's issues aren't represented at all, whilst feminists try to have a monopoly on gender equality, whilst telling the men's rights activists to shut up.
What I am disgusted by here is the trivialising of rape. There are...
By who?
I felt you did.
I was talking about false rape allegations which have nothing to do with rape.
By the amount of false rape statistics?
Nothing to do with rape.
Yes, actually. 3 in 10 rapes are dismissed by the police, just not even investigated, just thrown out. That's 3 times as high as any other sort of previous bodily harm. 10% rape, 30%.
You can't have usual just running. You can't stop interrupting people while they're making their point. If you want to raise a point afterwards, you're perfectly welcome to, and raise your hand. I'm going to try and pick different people each time, but can you please allow her to finish, because she's still got quite a good minute and a half to go, and she's been interrupted 3 or 4 times.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'd like to say that rape is already trivialised in our society. It's trivialised enough. And whatever else you would like to say, do not trivialise it. It happens to men and it happens to women. Do not trivialise it. It is serious crime.
Mentioning that false rape accusations happen is not trivialising rape. The people who are trivialising rape are the people who make false accusations. Tom shouldn't have to make a fucking 5-minute disclaimer about how he's also against rape before saying that false rape claims are bad. A false rape claim doesn't even have to get a conviction for it to tear a family apart and destroy a man's life. I'll link down below to a video from Bad Cop 69 for more information of what a man goes through when he's been falsely accused. And the punishments that women get for making provably false claims are a slap on the wrist if they get one at all. If you want rape to be taken seriously, this needs to change. Don't trivialise false rape claims.
She wasn't actually going to mention that, but yeah, there's evidence that suggests numbers of women who've been found out is actually inflated, and feminists will say that, because actually my feminism certainly is one that says we shouldn't be afraid of discussing the reasons why women enter prostitution, and we shouldn't be afraid of us not criticising her choices, acknowledging that it's very hard to make a real choice in society. It's very hard to make a choice in society where you're underpaid, overworked and continually sexualised.
Funny how the fact that there's male sex workers is never brought up by these sex-phobic feminists. Of course, men, they can make their own decision, but women, they're too vulnerable, they're too weak, they're too stupid to be able to decide for themselves that they want to have sex for money. You people think MRAs are sexist? You think we have a victim complex? This is the complete opposite of what you people claim feminism is about giving women choices, about giving them freedom to be able to have some self-determination and decide what they want to do with their lives. You want to control their actions. Just because you don't want to have sex for money, that doesn't mean that there aren't women out there who do.
The idea that, clearly many people in this room believe that an attack on the patriarchy is an attack on men. I don't really agree with capitalism as an ideology. It doesn't mean I hate everybody who makes money in a capitalist system. It's an absolute nonsense to equate the two.
But you've already said that when women are victims of violence by men, it's the men's fault, but when men are victims of violence by women, then it's because of something the man has done. So again, you're basically saying, I'm not calling the man violent, I'm calling the environment which he grew up in violent. I'm sorry, but that bullshit doesn't fucking fly with me, bitch.
And talk about offensive to men and hating men. I I don't believe that men are all sort of base creatures driven by sexual desires, which seems to be what's been suggested by some people in the audience. I don't believe that men are one homogenous group. I don't believe that men all agree on the same things and all feel the same things, and sort of just these purely carnal creatures, which does seem to have actually been suggested by some in the audience, saying that feminism is about hating men. Actually, some of the attitudes I see presented as attacks on feminism are often attacks not just on women, but attacks on men as well, and attacks on what it is to be male, because it's in a very narrow world where gender is really readily defined. I think gender is a social construct.
Okay, Estelle, I think you were taking the most pedantic interpretation you could possibly take there. I don't think he was suggesting that all men behave in that way. I think what he was suggesting is that out of the section that is men, there is a small section of those who do act in that way and are willing to exchange money in order to have sex. There is also a small section of women who are going to behave in that way, but out of the people who act in that way, there's a lot more men than women who will do that. As for gender being a social construct, in many ways it is. For example, pink is considered to be a girl's colour, whereas in the past it used to be considered a boy's colour. That is completely a social construct. However, there is also a biological aspect to that as well. We know that men tend to have a lot more testosterone than women, and women have more estrogen than men. And we also know that giving someone testosterone makes them act in a more masculine way. So clearly there is actually a difference there. Now, there are exceptions. Some men are a lot more feminine than some women. Some women are a lot more masculine than some men. And some men are a lot better at feminine tasks than most women, and some women are a lot better at masculine tasks than most men. So for that reason, we have to embrace individualism. That doesn't counter the fact that as a whole, people, men and women, have slightly different tendencies. So as long as people are free to make their own choices, and feminine men are free to pursue more feminine activities, and masculine women are free to go after masculine activities if they want to, that's absolutely fine. But there is a biological aspect to it, and I could go into far greater detail. I know it's not politically advantageous for you to accept that. It's politically advantageous for you to view all differences between men and women as discrimination. Where women are worse off, that's discrimination. Where men are worse off, then somehow that's magically discrimination against women as well. Now, we can argue about how much is a social construct and how much is biological and where the balance should be. And yeah, I don't think that the balance is exactly where it should be yet. We still have a lot of work to do. There is a real debate to be had there. And when you're able to accept this, when you're able to accept that yes, there are biological differences between men and women which lead them to tending to act in certain ways, then maybe we can start taking your cult seriously. Now, one way we should expect men and women to be different above anything else would be sex. For the sake of simplicity, I'm going to be talking about just heterosexual behaviour, because if I start talking about other forms of sexuality, that will complicate things. I'd say between men and women, sex drive seems to be about even, but the way we express that sexual behaviour is different. For women, having children is biologically very costly, and they can have a maximum of 10, possibly 20 children. So it makes sense for them to find a man who is a very good provider. For men, it's very different. The best approach for them biologically is to have as many children as they possibly can with as many women as they possibly can. Now, when men cheat, it tends to be opportunistically, so it doesn't matter if the person they cheat with is less attractive than their partner. For women, when they cheat close to ovulation, it tends to be with a man who is more attractive than their partner, so that they have children with better genetics whilst she can keep the provider/protector. Our drive is to have sex. Our drive isn't to have children. So contraception changes things so that these strategies are no longer as applicable in today's society. But our biological instincts simply haven't caught up. Now, evolution has brought about some countermeasures. There are bonding hormones, which make most people tend towards monogamy. And women have become the sexual selectors, as is the case with nearly all of the animal kingdom, meaning that there's a lot more variation in the reproductive success of men than there is with women. In order for a man to achieve sex, he either has to be a good provider or have good genetics, though preferably both. And it's worth repeating that this is just in terms of general tendencies. I'm not saying all men act this way or all women act this way. So men who aren't successful with women are going to be a lot more likely in order to pay to pursue sex than a woman who is in the same situation, because men biologically are programmed to be providers. When it comes to men who are successful, who have vast amounts of resources, they're also going to be more likely to pay for sex with a woman than a woman is with a man in the same situation for the same reason. So for that reason, that's why we see a lot more female sex workers and a lot more male customers.
Okay, I'd just like to, I'm not somebody who's made a study of feminism or gender studies, but I have been around a bit. And I'd just like to raise the level a bit of the debate, because it seems to me two things, first of all. First of all, I think actually Tom and Estelle have far more in common than we would readily admit, because they are both egalitarians. And Tom has actually prefaced his speech by saying that it was a typical feminist is actually, or a feminist would actually not be a man-hater. There's more a sort of generalised climate in society. And it brings me to this sort of point which Tom repeatedly made, which is that, is it possible, can we discuss the possibility that 40 years of feminism has produced a kind of self-perpetuating, institutionalised, man-hating culture which only exists because people have made careers out of it? Yes. And I'd also like to point out the fact that there are people who make money out of fear and loathing. And one of the demonisation of men is something which has driven the circulation of newspapers. And there is a sort of denigration of the debate of feminism. I think the sisters of the 60s, if they could hear the level of debate that goes on now, they would weep, because what needs to happen is the debate to be raised dramatically. And for the handy demonisation of men, both in the media, where it makes money, and where in social policy creation, where frequently you can see careers and whole organisations and funding structures driven by, yes, some of it is genuinely necessary change, but some of it we can see are myths, because revolutions create in structures which themselves are very hard to dismantle. And there are sort of generations of people who simply see a career in perpetuating a certain myth. So I would like just to sort of suggest that we could just think about structures and the long-term plan for raising the debate and for improving communication on these issues.
Just thought I'd include that comment because I thought it was pretty good, but it's living in a bit of a fantasy world, unfortunately, at the moment. I'd really like to be able to work alongside feminists, but unfortunately they seem to spend far too much time demonising the men's rights movement and best ignoring men's issues, and at worst blaming men for the oppression which they face. And unfortunately, I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Okay, just a few things I'm thinking about through the discussion. Firstly, I think we need to question when you say women aren't sex slaves. I think we need to question what kind of a choice prostitution is and what kind of a background these women have come from if they feel like they have to go into prostitution or even they want to. And I'd actually question the motivations for that choice. And I think that's something else that you need to look into rather than just simply being forced, no choice being sold. It could be many other things about their lifestyles, about their background that I think that we probably need to change, because I don't think for many women prostitution is a viable option to begin with.
So there may well be very many women who are forced into prostitution due to lack of options. There's also men who will do the same. There's also men who will see prostitutes due to lack of options. If we want to question which structures in society lead that to being the case and do something about it, fine. But for you to say that it's not a viable option for all women is just sexist. You do not speak for all women. If you don't want to be a prostitute, it's pretty simple. Don't be a fucking prostitute. But there are many sex workers who actually enjoy their work. Yes, contrary to popular belief, women do very much enjoy sex in general, and some of them are willing to have sex for money. So for you to basically say that they're not making the choice out of their own free will, implying that there's something wrong with them if they do that, is just incredibly fucking sexist. And funny how it's never male sex workers who are referred to. When feminists talk about male sex workers, I'm talking about the sex-negative feminists here, by the way. It's either because they're just sex-crazed monsters, or because they're men, they're capable of making their own choices. So, who's the sexist ones here?
About the rape thing, too, I say that at the moment, rape it's so difficult for women to stand up in court, and the person who raped her or allegedly raped her is so infrequently found to be guilty that I'd say that I think it's probably very counterproductive for these rape victims to be told, actually, there aren't that many rapes at the moment, and most of them are false, and there's a reason why police don't actually consider them. I think that's very counterproductive, considering what a serious crime that is, and just how difficult it is for a woman to stand up against the man who's done that. And I honestly just don't think that that's an acceptable thing to be trying to say at the moment.
Okay, so what you're basically saying here is that it's okay for academic institutions and politicians to lie about rape claims, about rape statistics, because it's for the greater good and it makes women more likely to come forward. I'm sorry, but that is not the correct solution to the problem. That will have the effect of demonising men and invoking additional fear in women, which will control the way they behave and very much restrict them in life if they're believed. Now, I understand that yes, it is very difficult for rape victims to come forward. I'd say more so with men than it is for women in general. But that is not the correct solution. Perhaps your institution or other institutions which deal with rape victims can speak to the police and work with them and possibly offer them some training so that they can be more sensitive in how they deal with those situations, so that they're not invoking additional trauma to people who come forward after being raped. But false rape allegations do exist, and they're nowhere near as rare as you think they are. It's also an extremely serious crime. The two are completely different crimes. Rape is one crime, false rape claims are another, and false rape claims people who make those claims aren't punished very much. Most of the time, they completely get away with it, even when their claims are provably false. And they are the only ones who are trivialising rape. If you want to stop people trivialising rape, you should be supporting the people who are pushing for harsher punishments for those who make false claims.
I'd like to kind of raise the issue that it gets to a point where the argument somehow becomes futile, because I think at the core of this debate, feminists versus kind of those who don't believe in its cause, or even why women feel that they need to be feminists, is because I recently went to a talk by Kimmel at LSE. He's kind of a feminist sympathiser, academic, and he gave a really interesting anecdote, which was he once heard at a feminist group a woman and a black woman talking, and the white woman said to the black woman, "I feel like we all have a kind of collective movement as women, sisters, or in a sisterhood." And the black woman said, "Well, I don't agree. I don't agree with that, because when you look in the mirror, you see a woman. And when I look in the mirror, I see a black woman. And that's very different, because privilege is invisible to those who have it. And it's very similar in this situation. The privilege is invisible to those men who have it."
So, her argument that feminism is valid is that men can't see the privilege that they have. How is that going to convince anybody? That's like a Christian saying to me, "You know how I know God exists? It's because he's invisible to you who don't believe him, so you should believe that God exists because he's invisible to you." She also fails completely to realise that if her argument is valid, and in some respects it is, that if women have privileges over men, that they are invisible to women. So that's not arguing for either side. That's just saying, "Oh, there's something invisible there, and I'm not giving any reason why it exists. I'm just saying it's invisible, so you should believe me."
And I wonder if you can define privilege in the kind of selected statistics. I think this is just becoming a battle of statistics which are inflated, not in just what you're saying, but in those that you cite. I think you can't just argue about statistics, because it is very much futile. No, both from all sides. Because to say, well, I heard 99% of prostitutes choose to be prostitutes. Where was that statistic from? If we want to battle statistics, we really need to have a bit more credibility, I think. And
I agree, but both sides need to work harder on making sure that their statistics are completely honest. But to be like, 99%, where did that come from? She's implying that he just completely made that up. I don't know if he made that up or not. Certainly say the vast majority of sex workers are doing it of their own free will. Supposing he did just make that figure up, that's better than what your side is advocating for. The people which you're representing are trying to say that no sex worker is in the job because they want to be doing it, although they might make an exception for men, since they don't seem to have a problem with that. Supposing that the statistics were the other way around, supposing it was only 1% of sex workers who were in the job because they wanted to, and 99% were forced into it. That 1% should have their rights protected. They should be able to do what they want with their own body, and your organisation should be focusing on the other 99%, and actually trying to work on some form of harm reduction, focusing to get them out of it. It should be legal, because keeping it illegal is what's causing the harm. That's why sex workers can't come forward when they're raped, and some cases will even get raped by the police if they do. That's why That's why customers can't come forward if they've been robbed. That's why there's abusive pimps in many cases, and why in some cases there's high risks of STDs. If it was legal, nearly all of that harm would be removed, and there'd be measures so that the people who are sex workers can have a way out of it. But of course, the people that you represent, harm reduction just isn't in their vocabulary.
Just in terms of you wanting to hear about some male privilege, how about we talk about the enormous underrepresentation of women in Parliament? Women make up 52% of the population. Surely, in any fair representative democracy, they would make up at least 50% of the Parliament.
I'm willing to accept that the balance isn't exactly where it should be yet, but it shouldn't necessarily be 50-50. There are some biological differences between men and women which may lead to why this is the case. Fair is equal opportunity, not forcing an equal outcome. Now, even within the group that is men, tall men and men with high testosterone are more likely to get into positions of power than short men or men with low testosterone, and between the sexes there is a huge statistical difference. To think that magically these effects disappear completely between the sexes is just madness. Again, academic feminists are obsessed with why women aren't as represented at the top, which only makes up a tiny, tiny fraction of all people, whereas MRAs tend to be concerned with the people at the bottom. Men are the vast majority of the homeless, drug addicts, mentally ill, homicides, victims of mugging, etc. Men are conditioned to be risk takers from a very early age, and we all know that gambling in the vast majority of cases leads to losses, but in some cases it can pay off, and this I think can partially explain why there's such a large gap. Also, men quite often are judged by the size of their wallet, so if they want to find a partner, they've got a much higher pressure on them to be successful in life. If you want this to change, surely you should be working from the ground up to empower women to take risks, to take more risks and to be self-reliant, and making it so that guys can take it more easy and engage in less self-destructive behaviour, and for guys to realise that they don't have to be judged by the size of their wallet. This, rather than pushing for female-only shortlists, which immediately push aside candidates who could otherwise be the best options. We're not playing a game here, so we're talking about people with huge amounts of power who affect thousands of people, and by immediately pushing aside candidates who could be the best, you are going to be causing huge amounts of harm. Now, which option do you think is more likely to make people develop sexist attitudes towards female politicians? Having more female politicians, but having them on average less competent because they only get the job because they're female, or having less female politicians, but the ones who are in power are on average more competent because they earned their job by being better than all of the competition?
You have the privilege to do that.
Second of all, I just want to, as I said, get to the core of the argument here, because we have been sort of, batting around statistics in a sort of not too helpful way, and I'm guilty of that as well, but it's very tempting. However, you say that most feminists aren't man-hating, and if you define an ideal, and I don't see how the perspective of feminism from feminists that isn't man-hating is somehow illegitimate in your eyes. And you seem to have ceded your point before you even begin.
I don't understand.
Because you say that most feminists aren't man-hating. Then how are you presenting feminism as this kind of corrupting force that encourages women to hate men? I mean, it just seems completely batshit insane.
May I suggest you slow down and think before you let words come out of your mouth? It's generally a better way to get your point across.
Statistics. You talk about domestic violence, for example. I've got a copy of the references for FEBA to. There's 177,000 studies done to show that women are just as violent as men when it comes to domestic violence. Okay, but as a politician, I'm going to say this. You talk about statistics. I'm not going to talk about statistics. I'm talking about people I meet. I meet the homeless, and I'll tell you this much: I haven't met the homeless. I go and speak to them. I go and sit with them. I actually hold them when they're crying their eyes out. I've seen, and most of those are men.
Yes.
They're on the streets and they are men. Many of them are young men. They've got no future, no girlfriends, no hope, some of them. It is very, very distressing. That's nothing to do with statistics, that's reality. And that, women, right, you talk about women, you look at the Tiger Woods, right? I don't know how many women he had affairs with, probably 15 or 20. But they all focused, all the press focused on how wicked Tiger Woods was. What about the women who engaged with him? They knew what they were doing because he was a rich, famous man.
Blame men.
Yes, and this is what it's about. But I see the real people. And you talk about where feminism is going. I've seen the money in my council going to feminist causes, and there's zilch going to the men. And the men are the ones who are suffering. They're the ones who are committing suicide. For every one man that kills a woman or hurts a woman, 20 of them will take a rope and hang it around their necks. Men are more prepared to do self-harm than harm a woman. It's against their instincts to do it. It's certainly against my instinct to hurt a woman, I can tell you that, and my kids as well. And that it's unnatural for a man to actually go and harm a woman. Those sort of people who harm women, there's something wrong with them. I will admit that.
A feminist speaker later on raises the point that the reason the newspapers were focusing on Tiger Woods and not the women he's with is because Tiger Woods is the famous one. So I'll get that out of the way. I agree with her in that regard. The point he made is kind of irrelevant. As for it being against men's interests against their instincts to harm women, I certainly agree with that. With the exception of rape, there's no evolutionary benefit whatsoever, and that's not condoning rape. It's just saying there's an evolutionary explanation as to why it exists. That doesn't make it any less wrong, just as murder is and killing is within our instincts. That doesn't make it right either. Now, as for harming a woman being against a man's instincts, you need only look at the statistics for muggings and that kind of thing. Men are far more likely to be victims than women. Now, if male disposability and female protection wasn't in part of our instincts, then you'd expect people who go out of their way to mug other people would be going for the easiest victims, which most of the time would be women, and that is the complete opposite of what you see.
Okay, just before I kind of get to the point of what I'm trying to say, I'd just like to rebut something that you said about women who aren't in top jobs, and you basically said that the access is there and that they can get there if they want to. And the question is then posed, well, why aren't there? You're basically saying if women can get into top jobs and they choose not to, you're saying that 52% of the top population just don't want to be politicians, just don't want to be lawyers, just don't want to do this. And I just think that that's a pretty irrelevant point. But
it's not irrelevant, it's the way things are. Most people who apply to be politicians are men. Now, if we want to change that, which obviously you do, the way to go about that would be starting from, working from the bottom up rather than working from the top down, as I've already explained.
Anyway, moving on. I think the main problem with the feminist debate is the word like feminism. It focuses a little bit too much around women. It should be more about gender equality, maybe. And so you should look at gender equality in a whole. And the problem is that a lot of, the people that have been disadvantaged in the past are women, and so therefore there are a lot of issues that focus around women, such as rape, such as domestic violence. Then there are also issues when men are also not necessarily prejudiced against, but men maybe suffer as well, but they should be addressed as well. But in this whole kind of gender equality debate, rather than just the two sides kind of trying to be against each other and battle it out, You know, you should look at feminism as gender equality, not as just pro-women.
I think that you are a genuine egalitarian, but you've been brainwashed by academic feminism and society to believe that nearly all the oppression which happens is against women. You also say that, you know, the suffering that men face isn't, might not be due to discrimination. There are lots of cases where it is, and historically men have been oppressed as well as women, but in different ways, and debate about who's suffered more, but there has been suffering on both sides. Now, I really actually kind of like to be able to work alongside the academic feminists as opposed to being against them, but they are the ones which make it impossible. When it comes to male problems, at best they ignore them, and at worst they find excuses for why it just doesn't matter.
We think of the Victorian era, for instance, as a time when women were horribly oppressed, but you know, there's another side to that. For instance, the legal principle of femme covert, which advised the legal experts that women could not be held accountable for a crime if it was committed in the presence of their husbands. So the history is not the historiography that professional feminists have taught you in universities. I distinguish between feminism, which I consider myself a part of, and professional victim feminism, which realises the conceits but then continues anyway. So I'd just like to remind you of that distinction. It is difficult though, and it's a semantic minefield. Call me feminist, call me a men's rights activist. It's all about equality. Let's have it.
If you really want to call yourself a feminist, that's up to you. I just personally find it a bit silly. You look at the word feminism, it has femme, short for female or feminine in it, so I think at a bare minimum you really have to believe that women are disproportionately negatively affected compared with men, but whatever, it's your choice, and I'm more concerned with the actual opinion someone holds rather than the label itself.
Feminism is a broad church. I'll leave it up to everyone else to decide how broad they think it is.
You compared feminism to a religion, not me.
Things where kind of men have suffered. That it's very much focused on gender when actually you seem to be actually focusing on class. You talk about the rights of working men. That's the rights of working class men who are constantly held back. We're talking about a different kind of elite. Let's not confuse things. And yes, it's the shocking realisation. Yes, I've got privilege because I'm a middle-class, university-educated woman. I recognise this, and I'm actually really glad about what you said. But I really don't want to get into an argument about statistics. It's the reason I did a humanities degree. I'm not going to be able to justify that.
There we go. So when men are disproportionately affected by something, that's not due to female privilege or discrimination against men. No, that's to do with class issues. When statistics don't match what I want them to match and men are affected, well, no, that's economics, that's statistics, that's got nothing to do with feminism. But we're all about equality for both genders, that's what we want, but when class affects women, and economic issues affect women, and statistics affect women, that is part of feminism. Do you not see the hypocrisy there?
It's the validity of those. But you mentioned feminism. Why is feminism important? Why are we having a discussion about feminism? Why do I call myself a feminist? Why are we not talking about women's rights? Well, feminism is important because feminism links back to a long struggle for equality for women. And the important thing to remember here is, yes, we live in an inherently unequal society. This isn't about one particular block always having more than the other, but it's about actually a systematic oppression of the majority of society. And we could spend hours talking about where that comes from, but the reason we talk about feminism and we talk about women's rights is because, yes, we're trying to make things more equal, but by understanding that, we have to understand that one group is inherently more unequal than the other. So actually, I don't think there's anything different between saying gender equality and feminism, but I just think feminism is so important. Feminism isn't an ideology, it's a movement.
Okay, so historically women have had less rights than men. They've also had far less responsibilities than men. So in the past, when women were forced to stay at home, men were forced to work. They had no option in that whatsoever. And what you're doing when you're forcing someone to work against their will, that's called slavery. Now, if we do accept the premise that women were historically more oppressed than men, then call what you're doing women's history. That's fine. Now, what you're doing today is you're saying that you have to accept that one group is more unequal than another. You're saying that you have to accept that women are more oppressed than men. So what you are doing is you are working from the premise that women are more oppressed than men, and then you're finding all the data you can which confirms that, and throwing out all of the data which discredits your premise. That is not the way we do things, if we are to be intellectually honest. We collect the data, and then we form a conclusion based on that data. You're doing it the wrong way round. You're looking at all the data where women are being oppressed more than men. You exaggerate that data by using self-selected opinion polls and other dishonest data collection techniques. When it comes to men being oppressed, you ignore that completely, or when it's thrust in your face, you find ways to make excuses for why that data doesn't matter. You are spreading fear towards men, you are making women feel like victims. This is sexism towards both sexes, it's plain bigotry towards men, and until academic feminism can address this and start having a level of intellectual honesty, I am not going to take you seriously. There's many issues which I think we can probably agree on, and I'm more than willing to work on those things myself, independently from you. But until you can address your own dishonesty within academic feminism, I am going to stand in firm opposition to what you're doing. Anyway, I've rambled on for plenty long enough now, so I'm going to end part 1 here. Part 2 will be with you in a few days. So until next time, comment, rate, subscribe, send me video responses and hate mail, and I'll see you soon.